Anytime I think Hong Kong filmmakers can't surprise me anymore with the insanity they put on celluloid, another one shocks me. And today's film is no exception. We have a Chinese torture chamber story. A 1994 Cat 3 film, I hope so, because the imagery in this is vile, directed by Bosco Lam, which I sadly cannot show 90% of this film, because if it's not nudity, it's torture, and if it's not torture, it's nudity. But if you want the pleasure to see some 90s Hong Kong nipples, you can go check out my Patreon. Thank you to these people for supporting me. And since this quickly rose up as one of my favorite Hong Kong films, I will not go into too many details, especially because I do not want to spoil the ending, because trust me, I don't think I've seen anything more insane than that in any movies I've watched so far. Just the beginning sets the tone for what this film is. It doesn't start with, introducing the characters, it starts with a narrator telling us about traditional Chinese torture methods. And then there's a clip show of those said torture methods, including castration, which we see in great details. Also, the traditional decapitation and, the very ordinary opening up somebody's head and pouring salt in it. Then we are introduced to our main characters, Little Cabbage, yep, that's her name, and Dr. Dr. Yang, who are put on trial for adultery and murder. How did this happen? Little Cabbage's husband was murdered because he took too many of a aphrodisiac, which made his Johnson explode. What the fuck? And the judge is quick to show us the goods because he asks for his man to torture her already. There we see some disturbing and truly vile stuff until we get a flashback of who these characters are. We learn that Little Cabbage was given a job by her father, who ran a sort of farm. I don't know. There's a lot of information I don't really remember because I was shook throughout the entire running time of this film. Anyways, Little Cabbage's father is talking with Dr. Yang about how he owes money on taxes. And he tells Dr. Yang that he is a fair man and that he could wait for some money until next year because the crops haven't been good. During that time, Dr. Yang is distracted by Little Cabbage, and especially one part of Little Cabbage, her little feet. You see, Dr. Yang has what we call foot fever. Anyways, he tells Little Cabbage's father that he can take care of her if she wants to come in and work for him as a maid and possibly eventually become a concubine. There we discover the slew of women that Dr. Yang sleeps with, including Jade, his main wife, who is not a fan of Little Cabbage because she can see that there's something between Yang and Little Cabbage. Then we get a very explicit sex scene between Jade and Dr. Yang as Little Cabbage and another concubine watches. And the other concubine cannot restrain herself, so she starts to touch Little Cabbage, which she reacts with, "Ah!" And of course that distracts Dr. Yang as he comes out and sees what's happening. But Jade is distracted because she wants more of Dr. Yang's wang. Then we go back to our trial, because yes, this is a movie about a trial. I don't remember CSI looking like this, but same concept. And there we get to see more torture. He even wants to torture Dr. Yang, but he cannot since Dr. Yang is a doctor of His Majesty. So he adjourns the trial for the day and both are sent to jail. Then we discover that the person who murdered the guy from the beginning, his name is Got, by the way, we'll come back to him later, is actually the judge's son. And he is not really happy about it, but he has an idea. Let's be corrupted. And this is the theme of this film, political corruption. And lots and lots and lots of titties. And also, for some reason, even though this shows us vile scenes of torture, they also decided to pepper in there some typical 80s, 90s sex comedy. I guess we needed relief, but also it's an Hong Kong film, so it's normal that there's, you know, these little comedic elements, even though in this, it goes over the top, especially compared to the torture scenes, which are also over the top, but for other reasons. Anyways, after beating his son, the judge is like, yeah, let's plant some evidence or try to get Dr. Yang to confess so that we don't have to deal with anything. Then we see a flashback of how the relationship between the judge's son and Dr. Yang's wife started. Well, not really started, just how it went. So Dr. Yang went on a trip, which his wife took the opportunity to send a love letter to the judge's son, and he decides to burn it to, you know, destroy the evidence. And he gets distracted and leaves the letter there. Also, Little Cabbage's dad got killed, which he was very sad about, and that almost led to a sex scene between Dr. Yang and Little Cabbage, but she was like, oh, we have to wait a year for mourning, which I guess is, you know, a traditional Chinese way of dealing with grief. Anyway, since, you know, Dr. Yang is not there and Jade is still jealous of Little Cabbage, she decides to sell her off to a poor man. Editing spooky here, I forgot a very important detail, so Jane is not only jealous of Little Cabbage, but Little Cabbage also caught her cheating on her husband with the judge's son, which is why she wanted to sell him to the poor man named Got. Thank you. The poor man, however, is known in the village for one thing and one thing only, his massive penis, which we see in great details as he urinates on a rat? The man has such a big Johnson that he drowns a rat in his urine. And Little Cabbage sees that and she's kind of scared because that's a massive problem to deal with. But Little Cabbage is kind of a freak, and you know, they kind of fall in love and she forgets about Dr. Yang. On his travel, Dr. Yang meets a couple of kung fu fighters who practice this very rare type of kung fu called sex fu, which is them flying in the air while having intercourse and fighting each other, which is not the first time I see that in a Hong Kong film. It's just really weird that it happened twice. Anyways, the kung fu couple see Dr. Yang looking at them, so they decide to talk and they create this great friendship, which will come in handy later in the film. When he comes back, he sees that his wife has sold Little Cabbage, so he's very upset and he starts whipping her, which upsets her even more. And there, she wants revenge. By the way, in between that, we get torture and trial, so just imagine the torture and the trial, since I cannot show most of that, but you know. Since Dr. Yang is mad that he lost his Little Cabbage, he goes to a wizard in the town, and the wizard gives him an invisibility potion, which works, and he decides to go assault Little Cabbage, which leads to this very comedic scene where he fights off Got completely invincible and accidentally puts his man milk in Got's mouth. And that's not even the most insane scene in this goddamn movie. And since Got is injured through this fight, he needs medication. So Little Cabbage calls Dr. Yang and he gives her a list of medicine she needs to help out her husband, which he does, but the judge's son and Dr. Yang's wife decide to plan something much darker. They add an aphrodisiac on the list that is so powerful that it can kill by making the man's groin region explode, which is what killed Little Cabbage's husband. And then we go back to the trial where they're tortured and where the judge tells Little Cabbage that she can help him out because, you see, Dr. Yang is a doctor and very close to the royal family, I guess, so he cannot get executed. However, the judge pulled off his license, which makes him just a regular civilian who can get executed. Then Dr. Yang asks his sister if he can go to the Supreme Court and ask for an appeal. And then the rest of the movie is that appeal, and that's where I will stop, because trust me people, you absolutely need to see this. This last 30 minutes had my jaw on the floor. My shitter was blown out, to quote the Great Moods, and I cannot believe what happened in the finale. It's really hard to talk about this movie because it's a lot of scenes that are so shocking that it's really hard to make sense of any of them. But trust me, get yourself a copy of A Chinese Torture Chamber Story, which is now available on Blu-ray through Vinegar Syndrome, not sponsored. They're just great, and this transfer looks amazing, and see this insanity for yourself. I thought that nothing could get more insane than Trilogy of Lust 2, but this just proved me wrong. Anyways, what did I think of A Chinese Torture Chamber Story? I loved it. For me, this is the perfect Cat 3. It reminds you of older Hong Kong films that were period pieces, but with 90s Cat 3 sensibilities. It is insane from frame 1, and even when you get kind of jaded, the ending makes you completely forget that you're jaded, and you will have your jaw on the floor seeing the absurdity of the violence in this film. It also includes everything you love from Hong Kong films, from comedy, kung fu fighting, but naked, and disturbing imagery. The torture in this is so vile and gross that you feel icky for even watching it. This is the type of movie you need to take 2 or 3 showers after seeing, but you also find yourself really enjoying it. It is fun, but vile, and really, really good. So go check out A Chinese Torture Chamber Story. This gets a high recommendation from your boy, Spooky Celluloid. See you guys next week.